This episode doesn't have a title, only a warning. If you are watching this and you start to smell burnt toast or copper, turn it off immediately. If you notice the shadows in your room stretching toward you, close your eyes and count to 10. I am not a storyteller. I am a warning label. I used to work in film restoration, preserving pieces of history. Now I am just a man trying to forget the thing I found in canister 804. It wasn't a cartoon. It was a containment unit. And like an idiot, I cracked the seal. The facility where I worked was colloquially known as the Icebox. It was a subterranean vault, 3 stories beneath a climate-controlled warehouse in Burbank. My job was tedious, but technical. I was a senior restoration tech. Rich eccentrics or boutique streaming services would send us decaying nitrate film reels from the 1920s and 30s, and it was my job to clean them, scan them in 4K, and digitally repair the damage. It was quiet work. I liked the silence. I liked the smell of the chemical cleaners and the rhythmic click-clack whir of the Steinbeck editing table. It felt safe. History was dead after all. It couldn't hurt you. The package arrived on a Tuesday, during the graveyard shift. I preferred working nights. Fewer managers hovering over your shoulder asking why a 10-second clip was taking 3 hours to color grade. The delivery didn't come through the loading dock. It was left at the security desk by a courier who refused to sign the logbook. The security guard, a guy named Miller who spent most of his shift sleeping, just dropped the box on my desk and shrugged. "Priority," he said. "Client says, handle with extreme caution." The box was heavy, heavier than it looked. It wasn't the usual cardboard or metal shipping container. It was a lead-lined case, the kind you'd use to transport radioactive isotopes, not movies. There was no return address, just a single sticky note attached to the latch. "Do not digitize. View only. Destroy if audio syncs." I thought it was a joke. Collectors are weird people. They like to hype up their finds with spooky lore to increase the value. I peeled the note off and threw it in the trash. I popped the latches. The air that hissed out of the case smelled foul. Usually old film smells like vinegar. That's the cellulose acetate breaking down. This smelled like sulfur and wet fur. Inside, nestled in black foam, was a single 35mm reel. It had no later tape, no countdown, and no studio markings. The metal reel itself was rusted, pitted as if it had been sitting at the bottom of a swamp for 50 years. I put on my white cotton gloves, expecting the film to be brittle, but when I touched the celluloid, it felt oily, slick. It was warm to the touch, which was impossible in a room kept at a constant 60 degrees. I mounted the reel onto the inspection table. I thread the film through the rollers, checking for tears or sprocket damage. Physically, the film looked pristine. No scratches, no dust. It looked like it had been printed yesterday. I engaged the motor. The light from the inspection bulb shone through the frames, casting a small moving image onto the frosted glass viewer. It started with a title card, hand-drawn in that jittery, bouncing style of the 1930s rubber hose animation. But the text wasn't Steamboat Willie or Felix the Cat. The title card read, in jagged, dripping letters, "The Hungry Line." The animation style was typical for the era. Think early Fleischer Studios or Van Buren. The characters were ink blots with limbs, bouncing to a rhythm that wasn't there yet because I hadn't engaged the audio head. The protagonist was a dog, or perhaps a bear. It was hard to tell. He had those classic pie eyes, Pac-Man shapes cut out of black circles, and he was walking down an endless looping street. But something was wrong with the perspective. In traditional animation, the background is a static painting that slides behind the character. Here, the background wasn't a painting. It looked like grainy, high-contrast film footage of a real place. A hallway. A long concrete hallway with flickering lights. The character, let's call him the dog, was bobbing up and down in that happy-go-lucky cartoon walk, but his feet weren't touching the ground. He was floating slightly above the floor of the filmed hallway. It was an effect I'd never seen before. A mix of live action and cell animation that predated Who Framed Roger Rabbit by 50 years. It shouldn't have been technically possible in the 1930s. The rotoscoping was too perfect. The shadows the cartoon dog cast on the real walls matched the flickering lights of the hallway perfectly. I leaned in, adjusting the focus knob. The dog wasn't smiling. Usually these characters have a permanent rictus grin. The dog's mouth was a straight, trembling line. He looked exhausted. He kept looking back over his shoulder, breaking the fourth wall, staring directly at the lens with an expression of abject terror. He wasn't walking. He was fleeing. The loop repeated. The dog walked past a door, looked back, walked past a water cooler, looked back. But on the fourth loop, the background changed. The door in the hallway opened. I froze the frame. I used the loop, a small magnifying glass, to inspect the open door in the background footage. Inside the dark room, there was a shape. It was blurry, just a shadow, but it looked like a man standing very still. I checked the film strip itself. The emulsion on that specific frame was bubbled, as if someone had taken a needle and scratched the film to obscure the face of the man in the doorway. It was a deliberate edit. I decided to check the audio. The warning on the box flashed in my mind. Destroy if audio sinks. But curiosity is a disease in my line of work. I plugged my Sennheiser headphones into the jack on the Steenbeck. I expected a jaunty piano rag or a brass band, the kind of public domain music that usually accompanies these reels. I flipped the switch to read the optical soundtrack. There was no music. There was no static. What came through the headphones was the sound of a room. I could hear the hum of ventilation, the buzz of fluorescent lights. It was stereo sound, incredibly distinct, with a depth that was impossible for a mono-optical track from the 30s. It sounded like my room. I took the headphones off, thinking the jack was loose and I was hearing the warehouse around me. The warehouse was silent. I put the headphones back on. The sound was coming from the film. Then, the dog opened his mouth. He didn't speak in a funny voice. He didn't bark. He inhaled. A long, wet, rattling inhale that sounded like a smoker with a collapsed lung. And then a voice, a human voice, muffled and terrified, whispered from the cartoon dog's mouth. It sees the light. Don't look at the light. The lip sync was perfect. The ink mouth moved in perfect time with the human whisper. That was the sync the note warned about. I reached for the stop lever, my hand trembling. But before I could stop it, the scene cut. The loop ended. The dog was gone. The screen was black for a second, and then a new scene started. This time, there was no cartoon character. It was just the live-action footage of the hallway, and the camera was moving. The camera moved with a predatory smoothness. It wasn't the mechanical dolly shot of a studio film. It was the floating, bodiless drift of a Steadicam. a technology that wouldn't be invented for another 40 years. The footage traveled down the concrete corridor. I recognized the architecture immediately. The exposed piping, the heavy rivets on the steel beams, the specific shade of industrial green paint peeling off the baseboards. My stomach dropped. I wasn't looking at a set. I was looking at the icebox. I was looking at the hallway directly outside my office door, but it looked wrong. In the footage, the hallway stretched on forever. The perspective was distorted, vanishing into a single, infinite point of darkness. And floating in the center of the frame, overlaying the live-action footage, was the line. It was a thick, black ink stroke, vibrating with energy. It cut horizontally across the screen. Where the line touched the walls, the concrete didn't just disappear. It turned into white paper. The reality of the film was being overwritten by the emptiness of a blank page. The cartoon dog scrambled back into the frame. He was no longer walking. He was crawling. His design had degraded. The clean lines of his body were fraying, like ink bleeding into cheap tissue. One of his eyes had slid down his cheek. He looked at the camera, at the operator, and held up a paw that was dissolving into droplets. "Cut," the dog whispered. The audio was so clear I could hear the wet smack of his animated lips. "Please cut. He's drawing the end." I reached for the stop button again, but my hand froze. On the screen, the camera panned to the left, passing a row of doors. I counted them: 801, 802, 803. The camera stopped at 804. That was my room. That was the room I was sitting in right now. In the film, the door to room 804 was closed, but there was light spilling from underneath it. A flickering, cold, blue light. The light of a Steenbeck editing table. A chill radiated from the base of my spine. I was watching a film of someone standing outside my door, filming me watching the film. The temporal paradox made me dizzy. I ripped the headphones off and spun around in my chair to face the heavy security door of my office. It was closed, locked. The small reinforced window was dark. There was no one there. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was just a trick, a composite shot, an elaborate prank by the previous shift. I turned back to the screen. I wished I hadn't. In the time I had looked away, the film had changed. The camera had moved closer to the door of room 804 in the footage. And now, a hand was reaching out to the doorknob. It wasn't a human hand. It was a cartoon hand. A giant, white-gloved hand with 3 thick fingers drawn with heavy, aggressive strokes. But it interacted with the real world. I watched as the 2D ink fingers wrapped around the 3D brass doorknob. The metal deformed under the grip, bending like soft clay. The audio track spiked. A sound tore through the speakers, a high-pitched scratching noise. It sounded exactly like a giant fountain pen dragging across a piece of dry paper. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Then, the doorknob in the film turned. And behind me, in the dead silence of the Burbank subterranean vault, the real doorknob to room 804 began to slowly, agonizingly rotate. I held the splicing scissors in my hand, the metal cold and slick with sweat. "Miller?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the sudden change in air pressure. The air flowing in from the hallway wasn't the recycled AC of the vault. It smelled sharp, chemical. It smelled like a billion Sharpies uncapped at once. I stood up, kicking the chair back. "Miller, this isn't funny. I'm logging this." I approached the door and pulled it open. There was no Miller. There was no hallway. The world outside my office had been erased. Where the concrete floor, the green walls, and the rows of safety lights should have been, there was only white. A blinding, featureless white void that seemed to glow without a source. It looked like a blank page. The boundary between my office and the hallway was jagged, rough, as if the room had been torn out of a magazine. I stared at the edge of the carpet. A single thread of the rug hung over the precipice of the white void. It didn't droop. It stayed flat, suspended in the nothingness. Then the sound returned. Scritch, scratch. It was coming from the white void, and then I saw it. The line. A thick black vertical stroke appeared in the air, floating in the white space. It vibrated with chaotic energy. It extended upward, drawing a door frame in midair. Then it drew a handle. Then the door opened, and the cartoon dog stepped out of the white nothingness and onto my office carpet. But in the real world, he wasn't flat. He was a monstrosity of biology forced into a shape it wasn't meant to hold. His skin was pale and rubbery, stretched over a skeleton that had too many joints. His ears were flaps of necrotic flesh pinned to the side of his skull, and his eyes, those pie-cut eyes, were actually black holes in his face, not sockets, just voids. He looked at me. He didn't bounce. He slumped, his body heavy, as if gravity was a new and painful concept for him. He opened his mouth and black bile spilled out, staining his white gloves. "The animator," the thing gurgled. "He needs more frames." I backed away, hitting the edge of the editing table. I looked down at the Steenbeck. The reel was still spinning. The loop had updated. On the small frosted screen, I saw myself standing in the office. I saw the dog standing in front of me, and I saw what was coming next. On the film, the dog raised its hand. It wasn't holding a weapon. It was holding an eraser, a giant, pink block eraser. In the room with me, the creature raised its hand. It was holding a brick of pink flesh that pulsed like a heart. "No," I whispered. The creature lunged. It didn't move through the air. It skipped. It was there, then it was closer. Then it was right in front of me, missing the frames in between. It slammed the pink flesh against my shoulder. I didn't feel pain. I felt absence. I looked at my left arm. It was gone. Not chopped off. Not bleeding. It had been smudged. My shoulder ended in a gray blur, like graphite, rubbed with a thumb. I couldn't feel my fingers. I couldn't feel the bone. Just a cold numbness where my limb used to be. The creature raised the eraser again, aiming for my face. I threw the splicing scissors. They spun through the air and embedded themselves in the creature's chest. But there was no blood. The scissors just sank into the rubbery hide, and then, pop, they turned into a drawing of scissors. They flattened, became two-dimensional, and fluttered to the floor like a piece of paper. I scrambled backward, sliding over the desk, knocking the film cans onto the floor. I needed a weapon. I needed something that worked by their rules, or something that could stop the film, the Steenbeck. If the film was dictating reality, I had to cut the film. I lunged for the editing table, my one arm flailing till the creature roared, a sound like tearing cardboard, and swung the eraser again. It clipped my leg. My right foot vanished into a gray smudge. I fell, hitting the concrete hard. I dragged myself forward, elbow over elbow, toward the spinning reel. "That's all, folks," the creature shrieked, its voice splitting into 1,000 harmonics. My hand found the film strip. I didn't try to stop the motor. I grabbed the celluloid and pulled. The film stretched. It didn't snap. It stretched like warm taffy, black goo coating my fingers. The image on the screen distorted. The creature in the room elongated, its body stretching toward the ceiling like pulled gum. It screamed, a sound that shattered the overhead lights, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the bulb inside the inspection table. I grabbed the splicing block, a small guillotine used to cut film. I jammed the stretchy, oily film into the cutter. "Cut!" I screamed. "Cut!" I brought the blade down. Snick. The film severed. The world went white. I woke up on the floor. The white void was gone. The smell of ozone and sulfur had been replaced by the stale, comforting scent of recycled air and vinegar. The inspection bulb on the Steinbeck had burned out, leaving me in the dim emergency lighting of the vault. I lay there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid to look at my body. I could feel the cold concrete against my back. I could feel the throbbing pain in my head, but I couldn't feel my left hand or my right foot. I sat up, gasping as the blood rushed to my head. I looked down. My arm was attached. My foot was inside my shoe. But when I rolled up my sleeve, I screamed. The skin wasn't skin. From the elbow down, my arm was gray. It had no pores, no hair. It looked like a rough sketch of an arm drawn with a charcoal stick on cheap paper. When I touched it, it didn't feel like flesh. It felt like dry, textured parchment. It was numb, dead weight, animated by nerves that no longer existed in this dimension. The film reel was gone. The canister was gone. The only thing left on the editing table was a pile of black dust that smelled like burnt rubber. I quit the job the next day. I didn't tell them why. I told them I developed an allergy to the chemicals. They believed me. They didn't ask about the arm. People don't ask about things they can't process. They just look away. Their eyes slide off the gray smudge, like it's a blind spot in their vision. That was 6 months ago. I live in a cabin now, far away from screens. I don't own a TV. I don't own a computer. But sometimes, when the light hits the room just right, I see it. In the corners of the ceiling, in the shadows of the trees outside. I see the outlines, the faint, trembling pencil strokes of a world that hasn't been fully inked yet. And I hear the sound. Scritch, scratch. The animator is still working. He's just erasing the mistakes. And I think I'm next on the list.